Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A on June 16th, 2023. So I just threw this Q&A up today, literally 45 minutes ago, so I haven't looked at the questions. I really have no idea what's up here. We're going to see what we have and go over them. All right, first question is rate of loss in an aggressive fat loss phase or mini cut to preserve muscle. I assume they're asking, how fast can you get away with in that phase, or what is an acceptable rate of loss. Retaining a lot of fluid, then your initial rate of loss is going to be pretty quick, simply because you're going to drop a lot of that initially, right? So that is going to be skewed at the beginning. But let's say you're kind of past that portion of the initial deficit, and beyond that, I'm going to be looking at typical biofeedback parameters in terms of training performance, energy, sleep, stress, so on and so forth. The typical stuff we would normally look at. So keep in mind that this is a short-term thing. Maybe it's 6 weeks, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 10, even 12. It's not a very long-term process. So you can get away with a pretty quick pace without risking a whole lot of negative adaptation or a whole lot of muscle loss, if any. I would say that your rate of loss is probably about as fast as you can go without causing yourself to feel terrible, without causing yourself to lose a bunch of performance in the gym, without seeing all your biofeedback go to shit. So that is going to vary greatly person to person, but people can certainly lose a few pounds a week in a phase like this without risking muscle loss, assuming that they're going into it in a pretty good state and that they're watching that biofeedback. Rate of gain for someone who tends to gain fat rather easily and who is an advanced trainee. This is going to be impossible to answer. With any kind of quantitative data, just because it's going to be purely visual. When we're looking at gain, we're looking at kind of the ratio between lean body mass gain and fat gain. So that should be a favorable ratio, and that's purely visual. It's not like you can quantify that on a scale, but you can quantify it in photos. So you need to be watching those areas that gain fat back the quickest, especially, if you're a male, especially that low back, or maybe it's your legs, or maybe it's your midsection. It could really be anywhere, but making sure that you're keeping a really close eye on those areas and comparing them week to week or every 2 weeks in your photos, because if you're not, it's going to creep up on you quick. You may see other areas like your delts or your arms or your pecs or wherever filling out and looking fuller and looking better, but then you go back and look at the photo comparisons, you're like, oh damn, I've gained 6 pounds, but it looks like I've gained 4 pounds of fat in my low back. So it's going to be just purely visual. Now also, people need a certain amount of body fat to function properly and grow, and that body fat is going to vary person to person. If you are someone that gains fat rather easily, you might be someone that grows with a little more body fat on you. You might not be somebody that functions optimally and grows optimally in a very lean state. Yes, you're more insulin sensitive. Yes, that's probably advantageous, but from a functionality standpoint, you may just be somebody that grows better with a bit more body fat on you. I have clients like that. It's just, they just don't really get into that good rhythm and groove of training performance until we get some body fat on them. So keep those things in mind. Okay, combating cortisol spikes at night, deep in prep, constantly waking between 2 and 3 a.m. Let's break that down a little bit. So first off, there's a couple reasons you could have a cortisol spike. One, you could have, it could just purely be an irregularity in that circadian pattern. Two, you could be dipping low in cortisol. You could be seeing your blood sugar. We call this like a adrenal dump, where blood glucose is kind of, falling through the night, and then as it dips too low, adrenals are going to respond with cortisol, adrenaline, glucose, energy substrates to bring you back up, right? Because you don't want to go hypoglycemic. So the body's making an effort to control that hypoglycemia by pushing that up really fast, and you get that adrenal dump, and then you wake up. That's why you would probably get a cortisol spike throughout the night. You may wake up feeling hungry or panicky or anxious or kind of stimulated. That's what happens in prep most of the time. Now, the other things that can happen in prep are circadian disturbances from things like stimulants, because people kind of tend to forget that caffeine's half-life is long. Like if you're taking in stimulants at 5 and 6 o'clock at night, then you're probably going to have a good amount of that left in your system. It's going to disturb your circadian patterns. Also, lack of energy substrate to maintain blood sugar. So like you do have these dips and things, and then you don't have enough. Your blood sugar is already kind of low to begin with, so your body's like searching for something to maintain it. There's not a lot of glycogen, right? So maybe using some fructose in your last meal, if you have any carbohydrate left in your diet, using some fructose in the last meal, store a little bit of liver glycogen, gives you a little something that your body can release throughout the night and maintain that blood sugar and combat that. And the rest of it's strictly going to boil down to your entirety of your circadian pattern. I mean, that's not a nighttime thing. Yes, having a good night routine is important. Yes, light exposure. Yes, like all these things, but it really starts from the time you wake up to the time you get to bed, and the totality of that stress on your body and your circadian pattern. So unless you have the luxury of deloading and taking a break and rinsing off fatigue, then you may be limited on options. But I would certainly use that type of feedback as one thing to look at if I do want to have someone refeed, or I do want to have someone deload, or any of those things. I like to build that stuff into prep for these reasons. Your thoughts on erythritol, allulose, and stevia in regards to GI health? These are all sweeteners. They're all different though. So erythritol and allulose are probably a little bit closer to each other than stevia. So erythritol is technically a sugar alcohol. What's interesting about erythritol is it has a very low caloric yield per gram. It's like 0.2 something calories per gram. So, I mean, it's like nothing, right? Now allulose is not really considered a sugar alcohol. It is more structurally similar to sugar itself. However, it doesn't absorb very well. So that lack of absorption means low calorie yield, which makes it a low calorie sweetener. And then stevia is a plant extract. It's a non-nutritive sweetener. Doesn't have really a caloric value. I mean, if you ate a bunch of it, it's a plant, have some caloric value, but it doesn't really have much caloric value, if any. The thing to keep in mind about sweeteners is they all affect microbiome. You can find research to find anything affects microbiome, and they affect it in different ways. Some potentially positive, even some potentially negative. Amounts of it matter. Your current gut environment matters, but you can't just be like erythritol causes change to microbiome. Yeah, you can find that study. Allulose has studies, So the problem with that is like everything alters microbiome, like I said. So in normal amounts or reasonable amounts, as long as you're not feeling any irritation, they're not going to be problematic. And I would say that these three sweeteners specifically are pretty low in terms of risk, in terms of having GI issues, especially like comparing erythritol to older types of sugar alcohols like mannitol and things like that, which will wreck your gut. So I think it's a fine option. I mean, I've samples, all that stuff. Now, a couple things with the test. There's some advantages to the test. One, it's a 24-hour average, so when you're measuring things like progesterone versus a serum, it shows you patterns of cortisol because you're getting 4 points throughout the day. It gives you urinary metabolites. In serum blood, you're limited to measuring what's circulating in the blood at that time, whereas with urine, you can see hormones plus what's coming out of the body. So what is the body doing with the hormones? What do these metabolites look like? What is detoxification pathways, methylation, estrogen detoxification, metabolites for androgens, cortisol metabolites, organic acids, which would measure things like dopamine metabolites and B vitamins and all these things. So you can see that stuff on a urine test, right? Whereas you just can't really see it on a blood test. So those are all advantages. So anyone that would want to measure those things are people who would want to take it, and those would be the people. But in general, people with any type of hormonal dysfunction, any type of adrenal dysfunction, anything like that, they're going to probably benefit from a Dutch test. It's a little bit more, costs a little bit more than a blood test. Disadvantages would be like it doesn't measure thyroid. There are some indirect markers on there that would potentially help you look at your thyroid a little bit, but it doesn't measure reverse T3 and TSH and all those things. But I use these on a lot of cases that are showing hormones on blood work that don't really look as bad as what things look like symptomatically. I'm like, okay, probably more to it. We need to investigate as to what the body is doing with these hormones, and that'll probably help us. Adrenals, especially if we're seeing adrenal function all over the place, it's a great time to take it. Menopause, PCOS, hyperandrogenism, estrogen dominance. I mean, any of those cases really would be pretty good time to take the test. If that's something you're interested in, if you're interested in the class or interested in doing a consult or anything on the Dutch test, I can definitely help there. Just shoot me an email. My email's in my bio. That's it, guys. Little shameless plug there. So that is all the questions we have for today. It's just a little pop-up Q&A. Thanks everyone for jumping in there so quick, and I will talk to you guys next time.